Okay, so first of all, I want to say that in philosophy, I try to control my biases. I try to subtract out my biases. This is, I'd like to actually make a separate video about that, not go into that too much. But the problem with talking about something like relationships, love, um, is that it brings in emotion, and of course, emotions are a great source of bias. Okay. Now, I want to do it anyway because I believe, in what I call poet philosopher approach, where, we're studying people's worldviews, our own worldview and people's worldviews, and those are largely emotional. So, we can't ignore those things. But of course, I risk bringing in bias, even though I'm going to try to do this in an impersonal way. Now, the way I'd like to discuss it is, there's a lot of little details in this kind of stuff. But let's just assume that first of all, there's would be a benefit if everybody could just handle. If we just made a mind experiment of this, if people could just handle open relationships, there'd be a lot of benefits. Maybe less sexual frustration, probably be good for America. Um, uh, Less of the violence from jealousy, things like this, because you'd have to assume that people could handle this kind of thing. Okay, now the other thing we could assume is that, okay, if someone feels like they'd be okay with it, they could find somebody else that feels like they'd be okay with it, and then you do it. Now, I've seen that and seen that fail. I don't want to really characterize why, but I do see some basic stresses in a situation like this. Okay, first of all, I think there's a sort of a progression in people's life. And being a male, I tend to see females going through it a certain way, and males a different way. But I acknowledge that there's some symmetry to the situation, though. There's some gender differences in the way this goes down. But basically, I'm talking about, when you're young, you get sparked by something somebody does. You know, they're, uh, you like art and they're an interesting artist, or they're a wilderness person. These are both examples I used in my first take, but I could come up with other ones. And because it really can be anything, and it could be something shallow, or whatever. In a way, they're all shallow, but not in a bad way. It's just that, you start to know this person, you find things about them that aren't right for you, things you can't put up with. Now, relativistically, I mean, maybe it's you that's wrong for them. Fine, but we're looking at it from an individual's point of view. So, in that sense, this person is bad for them, and that means that they're not good for a partnership because basically a partnership with them, costs more energy than it generates, for this individual. Okay, so they keep looking, and they go through this, and let's say eventually that they find somebody who sparks them in some way and is also, good relationship material and is giving them the partnership kind of energy that they deserve, basically. Well, at this point, what are you going to do? You're going to have an open relationships. That means that possibly, it seems like that there's a good chance that means that you're open to these people that weren't good enough for longer term relationships. Now suddenly, if somebody's going to spark you for 24 hours or even an hour, then theoretically, um, that's going to be fine with you because you're not going to look for the relationship with them, right? Um, Now, this is different if we're just talking about, well, somebody who doesn't want a relationship, somebody who doesn't want a serious relationship. Maybe somebody's in a mode where they don't want a serious relationship and they're just being casual. That's a little bit different than having an open relationship. Okay, so in the open relationship, like we're talking about examples of, people that are married and so, in a serious long-term relationship, but that's also open, I think you have this situation. So suddenly you're giving energy to people who ultimately, as a relationship thing, you and them, that costs you energy. But that's okay because you're getting that energy from elsewhere. And I think this is like this other person providing energy to enable this relationship. Okay, so suddenly, let's say that's fine so far. The other person is doing and enjoying the same thing. But to me, that gives me a reason to care who this partner is giving this energy to. That's my energy. And I don't want it to be, some jerk. I don't want to help enable some jerk that just has a winning smile or plays guitar or just some little gimmick. I don't want to enable those kinds of guys to have any women at all, even single women, let alone my partner, that I'm the one there providing this extra energy. Okay. On the other hand, let's assume further that, okay, you solve that problem and you only get really quality people that you could have relationships with. Well, I don't see how that can't be a threat to your basic relationship. So I think basically, if you have an open relationship, you have to be really ready to drift away from that person. Now, in any relationship, you have the chance of that relationship ending, and you just have to not be possessive enough to see that in the modern world. But still, if your relationship's very open, I think you're being open to that just happening um, through just a natural process where basically you haven't tended your garden, so it's just gone wild again. And that's fine, so that can fit with people, but I think overall I see why it's a difficult thing for long-term relationships to manage. Um, and in terms of my emotional bitterness, I mean, I have all the kinds of feelings that anybody would have, so it's like, I could talk about it abstractly, but I know, we all have pangs of jealousy. But even if I handle all those as sort of unhealthy jealousy, because I do think jealousy is very unhealthy. I am unequivocally against jealousy, in spite of what I'm saying. But even if I get rid of those jealousies, it seems to me there's this issue that's a problem for me of where is my energy going? Where is the person's energy going into that partner? And when things happen, if somebody needs a shoulder to cry on because of what goes on in these secondary relationships, who's going to be there? Where's that energy come from? So to spend that energy, you have to have a strong goal. Maybe it's a goal for people that really feel strongly about, having multiple partners, and are willing to spend energy just like you would in anything that's important to you. But I think as a typical thing, you're going to have this bell curve of, well, that can only appeal to so many people because it is potentially very costly in energy. So that's sort of the problem, and that's pretty much the way I see it, because I do think it would be a positive thing. I read a lot of science fiction when I was young, and Heinlein has all these group marriages, and it made me think about this kind of thing, for a long time. But I just don't see how it really works out, even with certain changes in human nature. I think there's natural elements of competitiveness in all of this, and in kinds of emotion, and where you spend your energy and how it's repaid, that makes this a really tricky thing, except for people that are very careful about doing it intentionally, because it's super important to them.